like to say that. Do you know what the slogan of this year's International Anti-Corruption? Also enriched with this development, peace, and security perspective. You know the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Yeah. Which goal is linked to what else? You don't remember. People say that SDG 16 is the enabler SDG, which means that other SDGs around recovering stolen assets and money, because it really its implications. My colleague Maria, where is Maria? She always loves to say that for development, peace and security. Why is the development?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize, I've got a bit of a flu, so I may sound a bit nasally. But I did not want to make a very formal speech, but essentially to try and engage more with you. I know we have a question and answer session, so you can ask any questions you like, and nothing's quite silly or hard or to ask. Please don't feel hesitant to do so. But we, as you know, that both under the Bainimarama government and under the Fiji First government, we took a number of decisive steps to be able to address corruption in Fiji. In 2008, we, as you know, created FICAC, and we then, of course, ratified UNCAC, as you would know, is the UN Convention Against Corruption. And we ratified UNCAC unreservedly. In other words, we did not have any provisos to it. And secondly, we also put ourselves up for the peer review program, which meant that we had countries that would come into Fiji and assess our compliance with UNCAC. How were we doing? Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing in practical terms, in terms of the application of UNCAC? Corruption, ladies and gentlemen, of course, is a bane on any society. It drains resources. It obfuscates the rule of law, undermines the rule of law. It also sets in place a culture that ultimately benefits only a handful of people to the detriment of the majority of the people. It also means a deterioration in the quality of service, the standard of service that the ordinary Fijians will, of course, receive, or citizens of any country would receive. We, as you know, also have a constitutional provision in our constitution that actually sets up FICAC. So in other words, it's constitutionally provided for. We're one of the very few countries, if not the only country in the world, that actually has a constitutional provision for the setting up of an independent corruption commission. It also, in the constitution, and many people don't realize this, also makes a provision to say that FICAC should always have enough money to actually carry out its job. We've similarly done that with the judiciary. Before, in other constitutions and during terms of other governments, whilst they said the judiciary was independent, there was no necessarily practical provisions made for independence. I can say to you, you are independent, but if you are not given the right tools to carry out your independence, then that independence actually is quite hollow. So in the same way, if you say that the judiciary is independent, you must always ensure that the judiciary has enough funding. So similarly, we have done so under this constitution, where it says the judiciary, for example, is not just administratively independent, but it is also financially independent. In other words, it must have enough resources to be able to carry out its functions properly and in a manner that is adequate. It also, we have the provision where, for example, even with the judiciary, and the reason why I talk about judiciary, because it is very important to understand the judiciary, of course, implements the law. If somebody breaches the law, then they are brought before the judiciary. If the judiciary does not have enough resources, then it cannot hold trials in time. We had, prior to 2007, for example, the Western Division. Whilst the Western Division has most of the economic activity, you have a lot of the hotels, etc., you have a number of businesses in the West, they used to have only one judge in the entire Western Division. in the criminal division and 1 judge in the civil division. Now, you had people getting trial dates 4 or 5 years down the track after the actual matter was brought before the court. So what does that mean? From a practical sense, it means that justice, as they say, justice delayed is justice denied. So you could actually have people who may be witnesses, they might fall off, they might migrate, they may get sick, or they may actually forget the actual events that led to the commissioning of the event, the commissioning of the particular offense. The judiciary is very, very important. So they need to have enough resources to ensure that we create an environment where we are able to, in a very practical sense, address corruption. We also, a few years ago, also in the laws that existed, we had what we call the penal code. The penal code actually was a very old set of laws relating to criminal offences that we inherited from the British during the colonial times. They set up this vast set of laws in British India where they set up the penal code. It was then transported to other places like Queensland, which is also a state under British governance then, and then from there we got our penal code. That penal code actually was with us for over 100 years. It had not been reviewed, it had not adopted new technology or the ability to introduce technology in evidence. It, for example, did not even recognize computer crimes. At the time the law was actually written, there was no computers. So we also have, of course, those laws were reviewed, revamped, and also the fact that you can have commissioning of various acts take place outside the jurisdiction of Fiji. As you know that I can, for example, hack into your computer sitting from a home in Sydney. You can say, and the old law did not allow for that to be an offence because the actual commissioning of the offence did not take place within Fiji. It took place in Australia, so you could not be prosecuted in Fiji. Of course, the law now recognizes the fact that even though the commissioning of the act took place in another jurisdiction, it of course has affected Fiji and therefore you can be prosecuted. To flip it around, as you know that, for example, when pedophilia, etc. became quite rampant, you had, for example, some Australians going to Philippines and committing pedophilia. So that is now an offence in Australia. So even though you may have commissioned the act in Philippines or various other places, Thailand, in countries like Southeast Asia, it is still, you could still be charged for an offence within Australia, and that's what we have done, for example, for corruption matters. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, I wanted to hold this up for you. You really need to read this wonderful bedtime reading. In fact, you should know this Constitution, because the reality has got a number of provisions. As you also know that the Constitution sets in place the Accountability and Transparency Commission, but the Accountability and Transparency Commission will come into effect only and when the Code of Conduct Bill, which is before Parliament, will get passed. Under the Code of Conduct Bill, it becomes mandatory for, right from His Excellency the President, the Prime Minister, all ministers, permanent secretaries, senior government officials, they must be accountable under the Code of Conduct, even people who've been appointed on boards. And so the Code of Conduct Bill is before Parliament, is before the committee. It's been there for quite some time. We hope that the committee will expedite their work and bring back the bill to Parliament so we can actually pass it. Now what that does, for example, the Code of Conduct Bill, some of the provisions within it, is that on a yearly basis, public officials must declare their income. And it must be made available to members of the public. So once that is in place, you can, for example, go to the Accountability and Transparency Commission and find out how much money Aiyaz Sayed-Khaiyum has in his bank account, his wife, his spouse, and any dependent children. And then it's an obligation on me individually to then update any information, but at the very least on a yearly basis, state or again give the accounts that I hold, how much money I have, how much assets I have. Now obviously, if you have a public official who may have $10,000 in the bank account now, and then 6 months later they have $1 million and not explained, then obviously there's something amiss. We've had situations, of course, in the past where public officials have been corrupt. where we have what we call unexplained wealth. We discovered, for example, in 2007, 8, and 9 even, there were some people who held positions in government that paid them on an annual basis salaries of about $25,000, $30,000. But they had assets that exceeded far what a person earning that much money should have or would have. Unless, of course, they inherited from the grandfather. But in this particular case, they didn't. So it's what you call unexplained wealth. There's a particular provision. We brought about a new law where you actually have an offense for a civil servant or public servant, that if you have an asset and if you or a group of assets and you're asked to explain how did you come to those assets, if you cannot explain how you acquired those assets, then it becomes an offense in itself. And that's what you call reversing the burden of proof. And that is very critical for us to be able to do that, because otherwise the state has a very difficult task, or the prosecuting agency has a very difficult task in respect of trying to gather all the evidence. So the burden of proof is actually reversed. The other issue, of course, is that we have, as I mentioned about the peer review, I've been given some notes here about the peer review. If you want to ask, I can tell you about that. We've been reviewed, as I said, by other countries. Fiji has now been asked to review other countries. We've reviewed Nepal. With Namibia, we reviewed East Timor. We've also reviewed the Federal Democratic Republic of Nepal. And with Brazil, normally you have two countries put together. So this time around, we have been with Brazil. We are tasked to review the country of Antigua and Barbuda. And then we have been asked to review Peru this year. So it gives our officers also an opportunity. It's not something that FICAC does. It's done at a state level. So it's through the Attorney General's office. We have some staff who've actually become quite good at this. So they couple with another country, and then they go and review the compliance of standards of other countries as far as UNCAC is concerned. Last but not least, which is very important, as you also know that the elections are coming around next year. One of the changes that we did bring about was the new law that was put in place and, of course, tested in 2014, and which is, of course, the Political Parties Registration, Conduct, Funding and Disclosures Act. Previously, there was no such laws in Fiji. So previously, anybody could go and donate money to political parties, and they could donate any amount of money. And as we have seen previously, where certain individuals or companies that have actually funded political parties, they have, once that particular political party wins government, they get special favors because of the fact that they funded them to run the elections or conduct the elections, conduct the campaigns. We, of course, brought about this particular law, and as you know, some political parties weren't happy about it because it brings about greater transparency. No company in Fiji can now, as the law stands since 2013, can donate even a single cent to a political party. And we believe companies should not donate money to political parties. Why should a company donate money to a political party unless they want something in return? And secondly, now because only natural persons or individuals can donate funding to political parties, it cannot be more than $10,000 in a year. So every 12 months, only every 12 months can they donate some money up to $10,000. They cannot donate anything more than that. What this does, it brings about greater transparency. Political parties now, of course, have to publish their accounts on a yearly basis. We've never had this before. Every year, the accounts of political parties need to be audited, they need to be published, and you get to see political party A, B, C, D, E, F, how much money they have, what's the source of funds, and where did they get those funds from, who donated the monies to that political party. Because, ladies and gentlemen, you need to set a culture of transparency. It's not simply one thing to sit down here and have a workshop and talk about it and saying, yes, we must address corruption. We must be able to address it in a very tangible manner, in a very practical manner. And if you do not actually uproot it, get rid of it from political parties, then of course you will inculcate a culture that if should those political parties come into government, then they will of course perpetuate. They will perpetuate that culture of non-accountability. So it's very important for us to be able to understand. Today, 69.4% of the entire Fijian population is below the age of 40. You people are those who are below the age of 40. You people are in the majority. People like me are in the minority. You need to understand that. And as we've said on a number of occasions now, it's the young people of this country that will actually drive the future of our country. You will very soon, some of you may already be leaders in your own right. You may be leader of an organization, you may be leader of a community, you may be leader in your company, you may be leader in your own grouping, you may be leader in your own house. You may become political leaders. Some of you, who knows, may become political party candidates in the next elections. But we need the young people of Fiji to be able to understand that. One of the things I'd like to also highlight is that before I finish off and open up the floor for questions, is that we have seen a lot of people. I myself am not on Facebook. I don't get on Facebook. I don't have enough time to get on Facebook. I know, of course, some people are on Facebook in such a dazzling manner that every 5 minutes they'll tell the rest of the world what they're doing. But there is this culture that's, of course, developed in social media, in particular in Fiji, where people are commenting on various postings without any verification of facts. People are commenting on comments without actually checking out the facts. So if somebody says, today a frog ate a horse, then people start commenting, oh my God, a frog, what color was the frog? As opposed to actually checking out the fact, did the frog actually eat the horse or not? You see what I mean? There are a lot of people who are making comments on comments without actually verifying the facts. And frankly, you can actually verify those facts very, very easily. So please, I think if you want to create and if you're serious about addressing issues, you need to be able to address these issues in a factual manner. You need to be able to tackle the issues that we do face in a manner that is transparent, in a manner that is not reliant upon rumors, about rumor mongering. And I think that is very, very important for us to be able to understand if we want to be able to adhere to creating a corrupt-free Pacific, a corrupt-free Fiji, to be able to ensure that even in the everyday applications of things, when people apply for jobs, people should be appointed on merit. This is why I keep on saying this. People need to be appointed on merit. If I get appointed for a position just because I'm from Nanronga and the person interviewing me is from Nanronga, then that's wrong, because I'm not the person for the job. If people get appointed because they've got blue eyes and they like people with blue eyes, or people get appointed because of the fact that they eat tauke, or because they're Indo-Fijian, or because they come from the right province, they got the right denomination, right church, right mosque, right temple, whatever the case may be, that is all wrong. It is all wrong. Because we need to appoint people for the fact that they are the best person for the job. If somebody gets a job because they know they should not have got the job, but they're getting it because of some favor, they of course will not do their best. They of course will say, I can continue to do what I like because they will always keep me. And that's what actually leads to corruption. That's what perpetuates it. We have seen it. If, for example, you may become a manager in a company, and it's very, very easy. Somebody comes and curries favors with you, and you are the one in charge of procurement. And we have seen, mind you, corruption is rampant. I mean, of course, it's not an offense per se, but corruption is rampant in the private sector. There's a little, anecdotal story that if you work as a procurement officer in various large organizations, they say always go and check the house of the procurement officer. The procurement officer is the person who always decides whether, if we're going to buy 25 sinks, who will get it, which hardware company will get it. If you're going to buy a photocopying paper, this person decides who will get it. So there is this, at one stage in the private sector, there was a 10% cut. So I get the job, make sure that if the tender is worth $500,000, I get 10% of that. It happens. used to happen a lot. Of course, have you seen some of the matters that FICAC has recently prosecuted were people within government? And you can see some of these people in the middle management level who are getting various favors from people who actually got the tenders. So you have to be mindful. Corruption is something that you need to be able to deal with in a holistic manner. It's not something that just sits on its own and somebody commits an offense. It's the entire environment that is created that leads to either lack of corruption or absence of corruption, or indeed it creates an environment that there will be corruption. And in all of this, obviously, if we want to be able to address that, we have to inculcate that particular culture of ensuring we don't want corruption. So, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't want to go into all the technical details about things like abuse of office, etc. But I thought I'd just set the stage for you to be able to ensure that we have a good, lively and healthy discussion. Thank you very much. Naka.
We'll jump to the regional dimension. Look at all these wonderful young people from...
Hello everyone. Instead of going outside, we'll just take the group photo inside.
Hear those applications in the chambers. The Chief Justice has now said it's no longer applicable. He changed the rule a few years ago. That now must be heard in open court. So even if the interlocutory application is for